like to welcome everyone to the Shir today, which we're going to be spending two parts on. The first part of the Shir is going to be discussing a little bit about Asara Beteves itself, and the second part of the Shir will talk about making Kiddush and Havdalah and lighting candles. Today, Asara Beteves is a very important fast day. It's different than the other fast days in some ways. Any other of the fast days that would come, let's say, for instance, if Tisha B'Av would land on Shabbos, so we push it off to Sunday. And if Shivas B'Tammuz would come on Shabbos, we push it off to Sunday. Interestingly enough, though, that we're not allowed to fast on Shabbos, if Asara Beteves, which can fall on Friday, it can come on Friday, and it did, in fact, last year, come on Friday, we would fast on Friday into Shabbos. Because Asara Beteves is of such great power that we would actually have to fast into Shabbos. And why is that? That's because it was the beginning that took a few years until it ultimately led to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And in the 3 years that Nebuchadnezzar surrounded Yerushalayim from the 17th of Tammuz on, in those 3 years, had Klal Yisrael managed to do some tshuva, then there's no question that the destruction, which ultimately took place, would never have taken place. And those 3 years, therefore, gave an opportunity to the Jewish people to do the tshuva. We're under the impression a lot of times that when we fast on Asara Beteves, we're fasting because of something that happened thousands of years ago. But Chazal tell us, and it's a Talmud Yerushalmi, that any generation in which the Beis HaMikdash is not rebuilt, it's as if that has been destroyed in our time. So we're not fasting, as Rav Sham Shafar says, for what happened 3,000 years ago. We're fasting because we're still in that matzah. We're still in that type of situation. And because we're still in that type of situation, that's why we fast in order to help us to do tshuva. And the halacha brings down that if somebody takes these days and fasts on these days, but doesn't do the ikr, and the ikr, of course, is the tshuva, then that person has grabbed the tafel and left apart the ikar, which means that person has taken the secondary and lost the main. Because the main purpose is to try to get better and to improve our situation individually, our communally Jewish situation, worldwide, and ultimately to make, therefore, the world better. And many of us aren't aware that the tiny incremental steps we take in our personal lives has a tremendous impact on the community and the world at large. It's almost, the best mashal would probably be taking a rock and throwing it into the lake. When you take a stone, a small stone, a little stone, and throw it into a tremendous lake, it makes a ripple effect throughout the entire body of water. What we do matters. What we do really counts. And consequently, our fasting and our doing tshuva does have value. It's interesting to note that the 8th, 9th, and 10th of Teves are very closely interrelated, and in the history of the Jewish people, events took place on the 8th, on the 9th, and on the 10th that are all combined. In the Slichas we just read, it mentions Ezra HaSofer. It happens to be that Ezra HaSofer died on the 9th day in the month of Teves. And when Ezra died, that was a tremendous day of mourning, because he was the one who brought Klal Yisrael back after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash. So his death is mourned on the 9th day in the month of Teves. On the 8th day in the month of Teves, our Chazal tell us, was the Targum HaShivim, the translation of the Torah into Greek, which, according to our Chazal, so interesting, they use such a powerful expression. They say that the Targum HaShivim, the day that the Torah was translated by the Targum HaShivim, Koshel Yisrael, was as difficult for the Jewish people as the day of the worship of the Egel. That's awesome. That the worship of the Egel was such a terrible day for us, and here we're saying that the translation of the Torah into the vernacular at that time was a terrible, terrible blow to the Jewish people. Why is that? So the Sefer Todah gives a very interesting mashal. Rabbi Yoel Kitov says, he quotes Chazal, the mashal is like you have a lion, a ferocious lion, and you take this lion and you put him in a cage. Somehow you subdue him, you tranquilize him, you capture him, you net him, and you put him in a cage. People now coming to the cage, when they look at the cage, they look at the lion sleeping in the cage and they say, this is not a ferocious animal. This is not a ferocious beast. I don't have to be afraid of him. Look at him. He's sleeping. There's nothing to worry about. He can't harm us. We've got him. So it was with the Torah. When the Torah was not available, unless one was committed to the Torah lifestyle, that is, they had to learn Aleph Beis. They had to learn Chumash from a Rebbe. They had to learn the Chazal and the stories. If they were not Jewish and they wanted to be Jewish, they had to take years and years, even today, of lessons in order to convert properly. So they get the hashrosha, they get the rootedness of the Torah, and they get the understanding of that rootedness, and they get an understanding of a complete emunah and bitachon in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When they get that, and then they come to the Torah, that is where there is a tremendous amount of emunah and bitachon, and the Torah then is open to them, and the Torah is recognized as being the awesome power it has. But once the Torah was translated into the vernacular, people started reading things, and they started making drushes of dofi, foolishness. They started misunderstanding the Torah. How is it possible to understand Torah without Chazal? So people were taking stories of the Torah and misusing them for the purposes that they weren't meant for. And they changed things, which is exactly what happened in the history of the Jewish people. As soon as the Torah was acceptable to all and available to all, it was perverted and it was destroyed. And that's why it's such a sad day. And for that reason, the 8th of Teves is also a day of mourning. And it's all combined into the fast of the 10th of Teves. There's a very interesting discussion by Rav Baruch Simon. He wrote a Sefer Imrei Baruch. He's a Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshiva University, one of the big Talmidei Chachamim. And he quotes, in that Sefer, he quotes a discussion, another Sefer that has a very interesting approach on this particular idea of Asara Beteves. He says, and the name of this Sefer is Beis Yishai. He quotes it and he says as follows: if you look through the history of the Jewish people, you'll notice that in the Gemara in Tainus, when it comes to, let's say, Tisha B'Av, so there were 5 terrible things that happened on Tisha B'Av. What was one of them? Going back to the Torah itself, the Meraglim. On Tisha B'Av, the Meraglim came back, and the Meraglim said a terrible thing about the land of Israel, and the Gemara records that Vayivku ha'am b'layla hahu, and the nation cried on that night. That night was Tisha B'Av. When it comes to Shiva Asar Beteves, there's also a biblical reference to Shiva Asar Beteves. What was that reference? That the Luchos, when Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai, it was the 17th day in the month of Tammuz. He went up on the 6th day in the month of Sivan. He came down on the 17th of Tammuz. So his coming down on the 17th of Tammuz was when he broke the Luchos. So the 17th of Tammuz has in it a tremendous problem for Klal Yisrael that goes back to biblical times. And then when Shiva Asara Beteves, the walls were broken through in the time of the second base Hamikdash. Therefore, we fast on Shiva Asara Beteves. So he asked the question, so what happened on Asara Beteves in biblical times, in the Torah's times, that would have an effect on later on that ultimately on Asara Beteves, the siege of Yerushalayim would begin by Nebuchadnezzar. He has an unbelievable idea. He says, take a look. What is the mazel of the month of Teves? The mazel in the month of Teves is a gedi. A gedi is a goat. The mazel of the month of Teves is a gedi. How did the brothers come to Yaakov Avinu to tell him that Yosef was killed? The pasuk says, "Vayishchatu se'irizim," that they took a goat and they killed it. They took the coat of Yosef and dipped it in the blood, and they brought the coat to their father Yaakov. And by that event of the slaughtering of the goat, they got rid and sold Yosef. Says that sefer that the Imre Baruch quotes, the Beis Yishai, Lule Mistafina. If it weren't for the fact that I'm a little bit hesitant and afraid, I would posit that the sale of Yosef took place on Asara Beteves, because Teves is the Mazel Gedi. And that Gedi was slaughtered in order to cover up the sale of Yosef. And the Beis Hamikdash destruction took place because of brothers not getting along, because of Klal Yisrael not capable of being united. So what's the tshuva that we need to do for Asara Beteves? The tshuva we need to do for Asara Beteves is we have to love every Jew. We're like a bunch of different bodies, but we have one neshama. We're all part of Klal Yisrael. And the mistake that was made with the sale of Yosef was the mistake that led to the destruction, ultimately, the base of things that we still mourn for today. And consequently, Asara Beteves is such a powerful fast. It has so much in it. It's interesting to note that it's the shortest fast of all the fasts during the year, because not even 12 hours, actually, of fasting, which started, the earliest month, 5:40, up to 6:07, but it ends at 5:25, which is not even 12 hours by the earliest month. And yet it's the most powerful of fasts, because it has in it the seeds of ultimate tshuva and nebuch, if not the ultimate destruction. So we have an opportunity on this day of Asara Beteves to do the best we can to try to overcome and help create a situation where we will be better off. The discussion in Halacha today that we're dealing with is a discussion first on Adlakas Neiros, and then on Kiddush and Havdalah, and also the Motzi. There's so many aspects of all of these laws that it's almost impossible to cover them all. I wanted to focus on things that people always ask questions about, and people sometimes need a little more fine-tuning in the halacha. The other day, I mentioned to someone about a very, very fine point of halacha. It's a small fine point of halacha. And I asked him, I said, if you could do me a favor, please, and do this, because that's the proper way to do it. And the person said to me in a sarcastic sort of way, but not meaning anything bad, he said, oh, Rabbi, you think that's going to really help bring Mashiach better? That's going to make the world a better place? That's not going to do it. So I said, you're right, it is a minor point. It is small. But the halacha is what makes the whole thing come out right. The success is in the details. When you buy, for instance, a birthday cake, and you want it to say happy birthday, and it's for a boy, and they write beautifully happy birthday in pink, what's the difference? It's a small minor item. It says happy birthday, and it says happy birthday Chaim, and the cake is a beautiful cake, and the taste is great, and it's going to be beautiful. It's a small little detail. But the small little detail, it just doesn't cut it. It makes it that there's something wrong and there's something missing. So sometimes, even small little details, and even if the name was in blue of oneg. And if it was because of oneg, so then you just put on these lights, and you don't need the candle lights, which give the kavod. And so we have both reasons. Now, what are the ramifications of this? The ramifications are that because there's an inyan of shalom bayis, and because there's an inyan of kavod, and because there's an inyan of oneg, therefore, the Shabbos candles must be utilized, and you have to have hana'ah from them. And therefore, they have to be in a place where they're going to give you some benefit. You have to have some hana'ah from the candle lights. You put them on the table where you're eating, they'll help you see, even if you have lights on, and they'll add sophistication to the meal. That's why it's always been the minhag that the candle lights were always placed on the table or near the table. This presents a problem. Let's say someone is going to a hotel. You're going to a hotel for Shabbos. They don't let you light in the room. It's a fire hazard. So where do you light? They usually light in the dining room. But if you're lighting in the dining room where everyone has a separate table far away from where everybody's eating, and you're lighting candles over there, and you're not having any benefit from it, then you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of lighting candles. So what do you do in such a circumstance? When you're in a hotel and everybody is lighting in the corner. So the recommendation is this. You do two things. Number one, in your room, where you're going to have some light, even if it's the bathroom light. Let's say you have a room in the hotel, it's a private room. You don't want to leave the light on in the room itself. You won't be able to sleep if you leave the light on. So what do? You leave the hall light on, or the closet light on, or the bathroom light on. When the woman turns that light on, or the man, if you're a single man, when you turn that light on, think to yourself and say to yourself, I'm turning this light on. I can't make a bracha on this light, because according to Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zechariah Levracha, in the Igros, he says you cannot, it doesn't mention in the Igros, but it's Mipi Hashmua, you cannot make a bracha on an electric light. Even though there are many poskim that allow you to make a bracha on a clear, incandescent bulb that has a filament that glows, still Rav Moshe said you can't make a bracha on an electric light. So what do? You turn the light on in the room. You have in mind that that light is considered for the lights of Shabbos, and when you light candles down there, you're going to have in mind that the bracha on the candles also goes for that, and then do something right by the candles that gives you some hana'ah. Say a kapitel Tehillim. Daven Kabbalah Shabbos. You can't daven mincha because once you light the candles, it's already Shabbos. A woman who's lighting candles or a man who's lighting candles has to daven mincha before the lighting of candles, unless they're not accepting Shabbos. We have a rule that women with the lighting of candles are accepting Shabbos, and therefore they have to daven mincha before. A man, we say, even if the man is lighting candles, generally doesn't accept Shabbos until the Zman comes, and therefore they can even daven mincha after the lighting of the candles. Okay, so we have the reasons on kavod and oneg, and now we come to a shaila that comes up all the time. I'm going out to eat Friday night. Right after I light candles, I'm going to this person's house. I'm not going to come back until later, 4 hours later. Where do I light candles? Do I light candles at the home I'm going to be eating Friday night? Or do I light candles in my own home where I'm going to be sleeping? This is a shaila, because you have to have oneg and kavod Shabbos where you're sleeping, shalom bayis, and you also have to have oneg and kavod where you're eating. So what do you do? Again, the same recommendation. There are two possibilities. One, light candles the way it is at the right time and have benefit from those candles. Daven, serve something, put something together at the light of those candles. And then go to the other person's house and eat there. And rely on the candles that they're going to light over there. But some people don't like doing that. Because some people are worried, if I leave candles in my house and there's no one home, I'm worried. It's not, you can't leave burning fire if nobody's home. Some people are very concerned about it. Usually, candles don't go anywhere. They stay still. But, people sometimes worry about it. So what do? There are a number of suggestions. First of all, you can get the tea lights, which you can put into a tray surrounded by tinfoil. You won't have any problem. That's number one. But What you could do is this, the same thing we recommended before. Put on the lights in the house prior to your leaving. Have in mind that the bracha you're going to be making is on the lights of the house too. I can't make a bracha on the lights, but they're part of Kavod and Oneg Shabbos. Then light at the house where you're going to be eating. And when you light over there, you make the bracha and you have in mind the lights that you turned on in the house. Even though I can't make a bracha on electric lights, but they do fulfill the concept of Kavod and Oneg Shabbos, and consequently I'll make the bracha on those lights. These are some of the major issues that have to do with candle lighting that people need to know. That when you light the candles, you have in mind that it's for the sake of Kavod and Oneg Shabbos. When it comes to making Kiddush, we know that the Gemara in Pesachim tells us that when it says in the Torah, Zochor es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, there's a din of Zochrehu al Hayayim. You have to make the Kiddush on wine. And the Kiddush that you make on wine fulfills, according to some, the mitzvah de oraisa. Some say that because you're davening Friday night and you're saying Elokeinu v'Elokeinu Ritzevim Nuchoseinu Kadeshenu b'mitzvosecha, and you're ending off with Echot Hashem Kadesh HaShabbos, that's a Kiddush. And then when you go home and make it on wine, it's only midrabanan. That's according to many opinions. This, of course, is only for you, but for the woman who didn't necessarily daven, or if you are being motzi others who are at home with the Kiddush, then it's a midda oraisa law. And a woman is chayiv in Kiddush just as a man is chayiv in Kiddush. Question, of course, if a woman can be motzi a man has to do not so much with the technicalities, because technically she could be motzi a man, but because we say it's not proper due to the fact that, number one, we don't want to put women in a position where others are going to be looking at them. And if they're guests at the home, that's going to be number one issue. And the other issue is because it's a shame and disgrace, unless the person's sick, God forbid. But it's a shame. A man shouldn't know how to make Kiddush, and his wife doesn't know how to make Kiddush. So, therefore, we generally don't say that women are motzi the man, but the man definitely is motzi the woman in Kiddush. The procedure is instructive and important. Many people are not aware of the procedure properly for making Kiddush. Here it is. We start with Vayechulu Hashamayim v'Haaretz v'chol tzvoam, but not so. We really start with Yom HaShishi, right? Yom HaShishi, Vayechulu Hashamayim v'Haaretz v'chol tzvoam. And why do we start with those words? If you'll notice, Yom HaShishi, Vayechulu Hashamayim, the first letters of those four words are Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? That's Hashem's name. But you're not supposed to start with the word Yom HaShishi. Why? Because that's in the middle of a pasuk, and you're not allowed to break up a pasuk. So what do you have to start with? You have to start with Vayehi Erev, Vayehi Voker. Now you don't say Vayehi Erev, Vayehi Voker too loud. You say it in an undertone, because the only reason I'm saying it is so I don't start in the middle of a pasuk. So I say Vayehi Erev, Vayehi Voker, Yom HaShishi out loud. I start from there. Now, at that point, when the person's making Kiddush and you're saying Yom HaShishi, one should be looking at the Shabbos candles. Because we're looking at the candles to remind us that now that it's Shabbos, I am benefiting from candles that I lit before Shabbos, but on Shabbos I'm not allowed to light them. Because I'm chayiv to be very, very careful of not making, of course, a fire on Shabbos. And consequently, I look at the candles, and Chazal tell us that when you look at the candles, it helps ma'or einayim. It's a benefit to the eyes. How that exactly works, I'm not an ophthalmologist, I can't tell you. But I can tell you this, that we have a concept that the eyes are the window to the soul. And of course, looking at the candles, therefore, is helping our neshama. So we look at the candles for the entire Yom HaShishi, Vayechulu Hashemayim v'Haaretz v'chol tzvoam, and we say that paragraph looking at the candles. Then we have the cup in our hand, which is resting in the palm of our hand, with our fingers embracing the cup, and we're looking now, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Borei pi hagaf, and we look at the cup of wine. So we switch our focus from the candles in Yom HaShishi to the cup of wine when we say the Borough Pri Hagafen, after which, of course, everyone's going to answer Amen, and we're going to drink. Now, there are 3 minhagim about whether to stand or sit by Kiddush. Some sit the entire Kiddush, as is brought down in the Ramah. They sit for the entire Kiddush. Others sit down after Vayechulu, and they stand for Vayechulu. And some follow the Arizal, and they stand for the entire Kiddush. All 3 minhagim are totally acceptable. But all 3 poskim, and Aruch HaShulchan, and everyone else, paskins, that when you drink the wine, you must be sitting. And that's because the wine must be Kiddush b'makom seuda, and you don't eat a seuda standing up. And consequently, everyone agrees that the proper procedure is that when you drink it, you must be sitting. How much do you have to drink, and who has to drink? Lichatchila, the best thing is everyone at the table drink something. Preferably, the one who makes the Kiddush drinks what is known as malo lugma, a cheekful. A cheekful is usually known as a rov revius, a majority of a quarter of a log. A quarter of a log is, on Friday night, according to the measurements we have, about 4 ounces. So a majority of that would be a drink of a little more than 2 ounces. It's a very small amount. It's 2 ounces. So the drinker should drink approximately 2 ounces of the wine, and everyone else can have a sip or a little bit in order to be yotzei. If the person who's making Kiddush can't drink anything that's in that cup, they should not be the one to make Kiddush. Someone else should make the Kiddush. So let's review. The major point of Kiddush is, first, we say Vayera Vayivoka slow, Yom HaShishi Alav, we look at the candles. Then when it comes to the Borough Pri Hagafen, we switch our focus and focus on the wine. Then we sit down, according to all opinions, and drink the wine. If you were sitting already, okay, but if you weren't, you must sit down in order to drink, and everyone at the table should drink some. Whether or not you use wine or grape juice is a discussion. Wine is preferable, grape juice is acceptable, certainly so, but Chamar Medina, which you're allowed to use for Havdalah, is not acceptable for Kiddush except B'shas Hadchak Gadol, except under very pressing circumstances. If you don't have any wine or you can't drink wine, make Kiddush over Challah, because you're allowed to make Kiddush on Friday night over the 2 loaves of bread. Of course, you'll wash first, and then you'll say the Kiddush, and it's not considered a hefsek. In fact, there are some people, the Yekis, who actually wash before Kiddush, say Kiddush on the wine, sit down and drink the wine, and then make a motzi on the Challah. And now we come to the motzi on the Challah. How many challahs do you need? We know you need 2 challahs. By the way, I should go back just to mention, I said me'ikar adin, when it comes to candles, you only need 1 candle. Our minig is minimally to light 2 candles. We light 2 candles for Friday night because of Zachar and Shomer. A lot of people have a minig that they add a candle for every member of the family. Kol hakavod. You should do that. It's proper, it's nice to do. But once you do that, you can't reduce them, except when you're traveling. A person's traveling, sometimes they might want to have only 2 candles when they're traveling. Okay. God forbid someone forgets to light candles on Friday night, and it's not because of a matter that they could not avoid, but something they could have avoided. It's a very difficult shayla, and once you ask their Rav a shayla, there's a possibility they may have to light another candle for the rest of their lives. It's possible. It's also possible that you won't, depending on the circumstances. Let's say there was an emergency, you had an accident, and you couldn't light candles, that's not considered in that category. We're talking where a person was neglectful. Okay, so let's get back to the challahs. We need 2 challahs for the month, because on Friday, in honor of Shabbos, 2 challahs, 2 double portions of mon fell, and there were 2 loaves. The procedure is very interesting. Lehalacha, Most poskim say the bracha, you take off the cover, and everybody goes, ooh, beautiful challah. Of course, they can't say it because they didn't eat yet, but they're thinking it, right? And then you give everybody a piece of the challah. And next, we're dealing with the laws of Havdalah, which are so important. And we'll take questions on any of these issues when we're completed. We have a Chazal tell us that just as there's a mitzvah l'kadesh es Shabbos to make holy the Shabbos when we enter and bring the Shabbos in, so is there a mitzvah l'kadesh es Shabbos when the Shabbos goes out, and we are mekadesh the Shabbos and sanctifying it by saying Havdalah at the end of Shabbos. There are 2 times that we say Havdalah on Motzei Shabbos. One in Atachon Antonit, and the other one when we say Havdalah. Me'ikar hadin, from the main point of law, one should not do any malacha, even though they said in Atachon Antonu that they're Mavdil Ben Kodesh L'chol, until after saying the Havdalah al ha-yayin. If they did do malacha, they're okay, because they already made Havdalah. But technically, they shouldn't get involved in any major enterprises until they first say Havdalah. And it's also forbidden to eat until after Havdalah. It's forbidden to even take a sip of water until after Havdalah, which is why on Motzai Yom Kippur, it's crucial that people who are hungry recognize that first you must say Havdalah before one can eat. In fact, it's so strict about Motzai Shabbos not eating that if someone does not have wine to make Havdalah on right away, but they will get Havdalah later, 3 hours later, for 3 hours they can't eat. In fact, according to one psak, they can't eat until Sunday night if they didn't make Havdalah. It's that important to make Havdalah and then eat. Of course, if the person is impossible, let's say you're in a hospital, in an emergency, and you're starved, and someone brings you a kosher sandwich to eat, and you want to eat, and you didn't say Havdalah, b'shas adcha gadol like that, you say, Baruch HaMavdil Ben Kodesh L'chol. Just that abbreviated little pasuk. Baruch HaMavdil Ben Kodesh L'chol, without Hashem's name, and then you're allowed to do malacha and allowed to eat. Let's go through the procedure for Havdalah. Havdalah, again, the minhag is different. Some stand, some sit, and whatever your minhag is, it's fine. Of course, when you drink it, ultimately you have to be sitting. That's because the Havdalah is like the Kiddush for the Malava Malka Seuda that's going to happen after Shabbos, if you're going to have one. If not, some people actually drink a little bit more of the cup in order to include that as the Seuda. It's a separate topic. We're not going to focus on that. The Kiddush, the Havdalah, is set on 3 things. Wine, Besamim, and Neir. All right? Now, all 3 things should be present, but you must have wine or Chamar Medina in order to make Havdalah. If you haven't got a fire, you can still say the bracha al ha'esh until Sunday morning. If you haven't got Besamim, you can still say the bracha on Besamim until Sunday morning. But you should have both. When you say the bracha on Besamim, it has to be Besamim that you can smell. What if a person has a terrible cold? And they don't know if they're going to be able to smell. What do? Well, take it and try to see a little bit. See if you can smell even without a bracha. Because you're only testing it. It's like you're not really eating it, you're tasting it. You're not really tasting it and swallowing it. So it's almost like I'm just smelling it to see. If you can't smell, you cannot say the bracha on the Besamim. If the Besamim have lost their fragrance totally, you can't make a bracha, Borough Minei Besamim. It's got to have the reach of Besamim, or you can't. And therefore, it's very important to make sure that you keep the Besamim fresh. Cloves are the preferred species to use for Besamim because that's the bracha of Borough Minei Besamim. Other things have different brachas. You have to be careful. Let's say you haven't got let's say you haven't got any Besamim, but you have a fruit which has a good smell. You could use the fruit for the good smell. But then you can't say a bracha Borough Minei B'samim. Then you say a bracha Asher Nosan Reach Tov Ba'Peiros. It's interesting. You can't use B'samim, if you can't say Borough Minei B'samim on fruits. So you have to be careful about that. Many times in shul, you'll see people who want to be yotzei with the B'samim of the shamus, or at home, there are many people. I'm yotzei with your bracha. It's important that the B'samim be passed around so that everybody can smell it. You're not yotzei with the bracha if you don't literally smell it. Therefore, you have to take the B'samim and actually smell it. What are the ramifications of this? I'll tell you the ramifications. When it comes to Borough Miora Ha'esh, the same law applies. You'll find many people, let's say you're at a home with a lot of guests, and you're making Havdalah, and you're holding the candle up, and there are people 30 feet away, or 10 feet away. And they're going like this. You're not doing anything, because la halacha, the fire has to be giving you enough light that you can distinguish between two separate coins. And that's why we look at our fingernails and our skin to distinguish between the fingernails and our skin. Rav Moshe Zatzal used to close the light when he made Havdalah so that he was guaranteed to be enjoying the Hanoah from the flame and not from the electric light, because if I'm not getting the Hanoah from the flame, I can't say the bracha Borough Miora Ha'esh to have the Hanoah. So the procedure is, when the bracha on the Ha'esh is made, that you say the bracha Borough Miora Ha'esh, then you take your hand, some people take with the thumb inside, some people out, you look at the difference between the nails and your palm, and then you go with your hand again, looking at the difference between the nails and the skin this way, and that is the way you fulfill it. Rav Moshe Zal would do it with first the right hand and then the left hand. You'll find some people using both hands. The Ikar Adin is the right hand. But in order to make sure that you don't get involved with the machlokas, whether it's one hand or two hands, so first he would do the right hand and then the left hand also. There is a medrash that says that Adam and Chava were covered to protect themselves by a layer of nail all around their body. And this protected them from the elements. And once they ate from the fruit and they were sent out of Gan Eden, it fell off with the exception of on the fingers. And consequently, we look at the Eish and we see the difference between it. So therefore, someone who's far away from the flame and does not see the reflection of the flame dancing on his hand, you can't have the Shammah stand here and you stand there and you go like this and be Yotzei. It's not fulfilling the mitzvah. You have to get close enough to be able to see the shadows of the flame on your fingernails. It's very important to realize that we're allowed to make Havdalah in case we didn't make it on Motzei Shabbos until Shkia on Tuesday. Until Shkia on Tuesday. There are many shilas which come up when it comes to all of these things. One shilah I recently got was if someone is in the hospital and they can't light candles, what should they do? So there are two approaches. Number one, if, let's say the woman's in the hospital and the husband's at home, the din and the mitzvah of lighting candles is incumbent not only on the woman, but also on the man. It's just that the woman is helping him fulfill the mitzvah by lighting the candles. But if the man is at home and the woman is in the hospital, what can happen is that the man can light the candles in the house and be motzi his wife in the mitzvah of adlakas neiros. She, in turn, can put on, because in Bikar Cholim and others places, they come around, they give a little 2-candle electric, they plug it in, and of course, we have already said that you can't make a bracha on electric, but since the husband is making it at home, she can plug that in and have in mind that that is her mitzvah of adlakas neiros. If they don't have one, if you're in a hospital where they don't give it out, turn on the light in the bathroom that's going to give light into the room. And have in mind that that light is the light for Shabbos. You can't make a bracha on it, but you'll fulfill the mitzvah of kavod, oneg, and shalom bayis. So there are a lot of interesting ideas about these three aspects that we spoke about. And if there are any questions now, we'll take any questions on any of these issues. All right, Mr. Pollard.
On the challah, Friday night, why do you cut the top one first?
We cut the bottom one first.
That's right.
Why don't
the bottom one first? Oh yes. Why do you cut the bottom one first?
It's a Kabbalah thing.
I was in the impression that the bottom one is reserved for Shabbos, for the daytime.
Right.
You cut the top one Friday night.
But la halacha, it's brought down that the preferred one to cut first is the bottom one. It's interesting. There are some poskim who say you have to cut them both. Of course, if you only have two challahs for the Shabbos, and a small bukala for the next day, what you could do is use the small bukala and the big one and cut them both. You could do that. But the minhag is to cut the bottom one, which is closer to you, right? And the other one is saved for the next day. This is an element of Kabbalah. It's not based on any psak that is not in Kabbalah. Kabbalah means it's esoteric and it's based on a Kabbalistic idea. But it's not based on any pasuk or anything like that.
I thought the bottom one was reserved, like when you had the one and the midbar, and the second one was for Shabbos, was the next day. Therefore, the bottom challah is the extra one.
The extra one. Right. Right. And this is just the opposite.
It's the opposite.
Right.
If a woman is alone, does she make up her own self?
Oh, good question. I'm glad you asked it. Okay. Is a woman allowed to make Havdalah? Okay. Should she make Havdalah? It's a very interesting question. So, there's no question that a woman is allowed to make Havdalah. In fact, it's brought down by many poskim. I made a note about it because I thought this question might come up. In Siman, let's see. It's brought down in Siman. It's Reish Tzadik Ches. We say Ches Tzadik Reish, but we don't want to say B'tzeach. Whether or not she could make Havdalah. But it's brought down by almost all poskim that when it comes to saying Havdalah, a man can be motzi a woman, but if a woman did not hear Havdalah, she can make Havdalah on her own. There is no question. Question about the telephone. Can you hear Havdalah over the telephone? But Moshe says no. You can't hear Havdalah over the telephone. Make Havdalah yourself. Don't listen to a man making Havdalah over the telephone. You're not yotzei with the mitzvah. The only time you can hear Havdalah over the telephone is Shas Adchak Godol. When there's a tremendous emergency and you can't possibly say it, only under those circumstances. But otherwise, a woman alone says her own Havdalah. No question about it. Okay? Any other questions?
Getting back to the challahs.
Yeah.
What's wrong with having one next to each other, instead of one on top of the other?
Again, there's nothing wrong. You don't say the mitzvah. I'm just telling you.
You cut your right one instead of the left one, whatever.
I'm just telling you the recommended procedure. And again, this is based on Kabbalah. This is based on the Kabbalah. That this is the right way to do it. Now, I'm not saying that if you did it a different way, you're not yotzei the mitzvah. 100% you are. But based on Kabbalah, this is the situation. All right? This is the situation based on Kabbalah. All right? Any other questions? Yes?
Okay, I'll tell. I'll close.
I'm sorry, what?
Like the H with 2 candles and maybe actually one light and take 2 matches and just make it so we have to give candles.
On Havdalah?
Yeah.
Havdalah is supposed to have a torch. The candle that you use has got to be 2 candles. It's got to be 2 fires that are close enough to meld one into the other. You don't have to have them literally touching each other, but our minhag is to have a torch because it gives the most light. All right? That's the minhag. You give the most light. And therefore, if you have 2 candles next to each other, where one flame encroaches on the other, that's acceptable. But 2 matches is not going to last. You're going to burn your fingers. It's not